Hi, this is Chris Newsom. Welcome to the Root Cause Analysis podcast, where we'll take our listeners right to the heart of the important EHS issues. We're coming to you live from Woodland Grange, a conference and hotel venue in the Midlands. This special episode of the Root Cause Analysis podcast was filmed at Make UK's National Manufacturing Conference at the QEII Centre in Westminster, London, on the 4th of March 2025. Welcome to this session. You've seen the title, it's there. I'm sure you know what the session's about, otherwise, what the title is anyway, otherwise you wouldn't be here. First of all, thank you for choosing this session. Quite a competitive space up here with lots of different sessions going on. Thank you. Over the next 45 minutes, we are going to talk to you about really three things to do with safety culture. What it is, we're going to try and define it. That'll be an interesting, very short session, I think. Why it's important, and then what you can do to influence it in your own organisations. I thought when this title was put together, a little bit dangerous. As soon as you insert the word safety in front or behind or anywhere near another word, people perceive it to be quite boring and rules-based and all that sort of stuff. So again, thank you for coming to this session. The session's clearly going to be exciting. You can see that from the title. We're very, very lucky to have a brilliant panel as well. Not as big as the panel was meant to be originally. We had a last-minute cancellation, but we've got the important people, so that's good. So first of all, let me introduce everyone. So first of all, my name is Chris Newsom, and I'm the EHS Director at Make UK. So let's be crystal clear here. It doesn't mean I'm responsible for EHS at Make UK. That's not part of my job. My job is to help our members with EHS services, environmental health and safety services. So that's me, joined by our brilliant panel. Barbara, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Barbara Hutton. I'm one of the consultants at Make UK. I've been around the houses when it comes to health and safety and culture. I've worked in many different industries, waste and recycling, fast-moving consumer goods, even on the Crossrail project in construction. And for many years, I mentioned waste and recycling. So safety culture is something that's very important. I've seen it done, safety culture bring an organisation down very quickly, but it can also lift it up, which is why I'm delighted to be here today to talk about that topic.
Thank you, Barbara. And Paul?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Paul Lowe. So I work for Brush Group. We have business basically split into two parts, engineering solutions and engineered products. So our engineered products business is where we make transformers and switchgear, and we make them switchgear in South Wales, and we make transformers in Loughborough and in Italy. We've then got our engineered solutions businesses, which is where we design basically for the energy infrastructure, and we'll also refurbish substations, laying cables, all that kind of good stuff. I've been with the business I joined in about 1985, so do the math, that makes me very old. So, but I've seen lots of changes over these years, as I'm sure you can imagine. And it's fair to say that over the last 3 to 4 years, it's been a positive change as our business has actually grown. It's probably doubled in size, to be honest.
Thank you, Paul. So, that's the panel. I'm me. This is the subject, safety culture. So, lots of different terms and words are used. I'm just going to sort of introduce the subject for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to get into some conversation. So lots of different phrases and words are used. Everything from things like our way that you can see in the top corner there. So many companies will call it the, insert the name of your company here, way, whatever it might be, to very complicated, I probably shouldn't say that, very long definitions like the HSE's 136 word paragraph at the beginning of their approved code of practice. So lots of different definitions. In my opinion, the important thing is not the definition. You know, define it how you want, call it what you like, doesn't really matter. In simple terms, it's the way that your organisation is, the way that things happen in your organisation. It's influenced by lots of things. It's influenced by the people in it, the jobs that they do, the surrounding environment. Lots of different things drive that culture. So I wouldn't waste your time trying to define it. I once tried to do that on LinkedIn and was bombarded with 100 messages telling me how I was wrong and the people had a different opinion. So defining it is not the most important thing. Knowing a bit about what it is and why it's important is, and that's what we're going to focus on. So, safety culture. Why does it matter? A few reasons. The wrong culture drives the wrong behaviours. So, if you are an organisation, if there are any organisations here that will openly say that they put profit before their people, probably aren't, not a good thing to say, I wouldn't imagine, but companies that do put profit before their own people, will not have a very good safety culture. They won't drive things forward in terms of safety. And that's a very obvious example. A less obvious example is the small decisions that companies make. It is quite obvious to your workers when you make a decision based on profit rather than safety. It's quite obvious. People can see that, as we all know. So having that wrong culture drives the wrong behaviours. Well, why are behaviours important? Well, here's a number. You probably know this number already, or at least that it's the great majority of accidents that happen in the UK. According to the HSE, who are the regulator here, 87%, 90%, let's call it, of accidents are based on behaviours. Not rules, not procedures, not having the wrong equipment, but the choices that people make influenced by what's around them, as I mentioned. So it's important because of that. The next point now, I don't know if you agree with it, but it seems in most, sort of Western culture businesses, the more senior you are in an organisation, the more sway you have, the more influence you have. That just seems to be the way it is, whether that's right or wrong, you can decide, but it seems to be the way that it is. So the more senior you are, the more able you are to influence that culture, positively and, of course, negatively. So that is interesting. And the next 2 points are opinions, really. The very last one is backed up by a bit of a statistic. If your people think that you don't care about them, if they think that you put productivity before their safety, their well-being, all of those sorts of things, then yes, they'll be unhappy. Okay, that's sort of taken for granted. They also won't get involved in initiatives. You will not benefit from all the good things that they know and they could tell you. So it's harmful to your company for people to think they're not cared about, I would suggest. And one of the surveys we looked at recently in terms of employment tells us that if people aren't happy, this is in the last couple of years, there's a greater desire for them just to pick up and leave, especially the younger generation coming into the workforce. If they think they're not cared about, if they don't perhaps agree with the way that an organisation's going, they're much more flexible in terms of who they work for. These things are more important, I would say, more recently. So, look, I mean, that's why safety culture is important, one of the areas of reason anyway. According to Forbes magazine, there are other reasons, so I'm not going to go through all of these, but as well as it's the right thing to do, as well as all the points I just made, it does all of those things. So it fuels creativity, it makes people get involved in things, it makes them innovate, it drives continuous improvement, and that's, that is quite important in business. Has everyone got one of the ISO standards? 9001, 14, 45, something like that? Everyone's nodding their head. You have to do continuous improvement. If you don't have the right culture, it makes it very hard. So those are the benefits of getting it right. We need to just touch on briefly the costs of getting it wrong. I've just said, and the HSE have just said more importantly, that 87% of accidents in the UK are related to behaviour, and behaviour is driven by the culture that you have. Would everyone sort of agree with those principles? So I'm making a link between culture and cost in terms of money, but also in terms of people and harm here. I'm not going to talk about all these statistics because that really will get, A, depressing and B, boring. I'm going to touch on three. The first one's in the middle, 138 people killed in UK workplaces last year. I won't ask you whether you think that's a big or a small number. It's a bit of an irrelevant question. That's a lot of people in a very developed country that come to work and don't go home again. 87% of those were based on some sort of behaviour of someone, which is linked to culture. So 138 fatalities. The other number there is, you can see 12,000. So the fatalities thing is accidents, physical accidents that have happened in the workplace, and there's an immediate result. The 12,000 is about long-term health problems. And I think that's related to culture and behaviour as well. Did people wear the right equipment? Did they make the right choices? So these are big numbers. The biggest one's the one in the right-hand corner, which is 14.5 billion. That's the cost of accidents and poor health and safety, if you want to put it like that, to the UK economy, to UK workplaces, actually. So this is all important stuff. I mean, choose whatever reason you want. If it's moral, legal, or financial, it's important stuff. And I'm sure you know this fact as well as all of those costs. If we're having accidents as organisations, we are going to get prosecuted these days. And these days, those prosecutions are based on turnover rather than profit, and they're based on likely outcome rather than actual harm. So, you know, it's a really tough legislative environment that we're in, but for good reason. So, that's why a little bit around safety culture, why it's important. We're going to do a bit of an experiment now. So this is one of the more well-known cultural models. The Bradley curve originally, which is a reasonably old model. We've shamelessly taken it, got the same words, put our colours in it, but it's the Bradley curve at the end of the day. And it talks about the culture in your organisation. There are 4 stages or 4 zones, if you like, that you can see up there. So I'm going to explain those or talk a little bit about them, and then I'm going to ask you, by a show of hands, to tell us where you think you lie or where your organisation lies along that journey. And we'll talk briefly about why that's important. So right up on the left-hand side, we've got an area called reactive. This is where accidents just happen. They're a total surprise. No one knows they were going to happen. No one's aware of the hazards. And when they do happen, the management reaction is to get involved at that point and tell people off because they've had an accident. So that's reactive. Dependent is where we have rules and procedures. We're aware of the hazards, but no one really follows them unless they're policed. So that, you know, you have supervisors who spend 90% of their time telling people to follow the rules. So that's dependent. We've then got independent, where people look after themselves. They know the rules, they know the hazards, they follow them, they look after themselves. And then we've got the final one, which is interdependent, where not only do you look after yourself, but you look after other colleagues as well. And what I mean by that, just as an example, you do the right thing, okay, that's independent. If you see someone else doing the wrong thing, you tell them about it. That's interdependent. So you're looking after colleagues that are there. So, simple question. There are 4 areas there. I'm going to ask you where you think you are. Okay, just by show of hands in a second. We usually spend a lot longer on this. We have a questionnaire. We have a whole action plan of what to do about where you are. Today is just a very quick, almost experiment, see where we are in the room. So we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to ask you to put your hand up as we go through each stage. So who thinks their organisation is in this reactive stage? Someone would be very brave to put their hand up, let's be honest at this point. Okay, no one. Excellent, right. Okay. Dependent. Okay, so we've got some rules, but they require policing and people sort of reminding people what the rules are. Okay, thank you very much for your honesty there. That's dependent. Independent. Okay, so the majority so far, people look after themselves, follow the rules, and then interdependent. 1. Okay, 2, 3, 4. Okay, fantastic. So it's not a setup. Wasn't made to happen like that. But the great majority of people were in the middle. No one said they were at the beginning. Very few people, but some people said they were at the end. There's a quick summary, a quick interpretation of the results. That is pretty much, not surprised here, that's pretty much what we get when we go through this more complicated survey. There's more evidence to then base what you do next on, of course. But interesting. because it bears out, real life, if you like. So again, thank you for being honest.
Chris, I've got a question, if you don't mind.
Sure, Bob. Yeah.
Can you put your hands up if you think you've got a mix of maybe independent or dependent and teams?
I think that's the majority. Yeah.
As in,
Great question.
Yeah. Okay. The point I wanted to make is I go to some businesses and I see that they have pockets of excellence when it comes to safety culture in certain departments, and then other areas, poor safety culture.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily have one across the whole business. It can be quite varied depending on which department you're looking at.
And just that is, again, it is definitely interesting, because what I think happens as well, I don't know if you agree, Barb, depends who you ask. That's sort of what you said, but you ask higher level, you ask senior executives, well, we're all over here actually, which is interesting. And you ask, people on the production line, and they'll say we're reactive, or probably the second one along. So it's interesting.
Yeah, one of the most fun things I do is I'll talk to the leaders, we'll do a little bit of a culture survey, and then I'll chuck them out the room, and I'll get the supervisors in, and we'll do the same survey. Oh, they're quite different normally.
Okay, yeah. And the truth is somewhere in the middle, probably. Excellent. Okay, so thank you for taking part in that experiment, and thank you very much, Barb. So we're now going to go into the question and answer, hopefully, part of the session. So I'm going to pose some questions to our panel. We are going to leave time at the end for you to ask questions as well. The purpose of this is that Paul and his organisation have gone through this journey, so we're hoping that people can benefit from that experience, and Barb, as she's illustrated there, has helped many of our member organisations go through that journey. So, Paul, if it's okay if we start with you?
Absolutely.
So, you've been working on safety culture for a few years now. Can you tell us where you were when you started and where you think you are now, please?
Yep, not a problem. So I think probably like most people in the room, when we started, we was in the independent stage. We've got a good safety culture, a good mature safety culture, but we wanted to make further improvements. We was conscious that, there's a lot of good stuff that we're doing, but how do we actually move on so that everybody is responsible and looking after their own health and safety, but also the health and safety of others. Now, if I think back to when I first started at Brush, it was quite clear we was in that reactive stage. Accidents happened, and when they happened, we just dealt with them. It was too late then, we wasn't proactive in any way, and unfortunately, I say accidents did happen, and we was very good at, shall we say, firefighting. I'm sure many people have heard that phrase before. We then moved, and I can see this, if I go back 10 years, we was very clearly in this dependent stage. We've got policies and procedures, and our supervision would manage, shall we say, with a big stick. If you stepped out of line, you was reprimanded, you was pulled in. This is the policy, this is the way we actually do it. So, we've now moved on, and we're in a far better position. Employees, look after their own health and safety, but we've also introduced quite a few initiatives now where we get our employees and our workers not only to look after their own health and safety, but to recognise hazards, unsafe working, and we've empowered them to look after the health and safety of their colleagues as well. So if they see an unsafe act, an unsafe condition, we say to them, stop. We allow them to stop, we've empowered them to stop the process, and we take that on board. So where we are at the moment, I would say we've definitely got one foot firmly in the independent stage.
Okay. And I'm just interested, Paul, thanks for the answer there. How do you, when you said you started and you were in the reactive part, what were some of the indicators? How did you know that? Did you do anything sort of, analytical to find out, or was it just obvious?
So for me, really, I think it's that, if I think about the manufacturing, it's that old school manufacturing, where within our industry, shit happens, pardon the French, and we expected that. Well, we're in a manufacturing industry, people are bound to cut their fingers, people are bound to get hurt, and we kind of accepted that, and that was the culture of our senior leadership team. It wasn't about going out there and being proactive, and how do we prevent these things from occurring? Well, yeah, we make things, don't we? People use their hands, so because they use their hands, accidents will happen. And we've unfortunately, we've had over the last 4 years, we've had a change at the top, and things are totally different now.
Excellent. So we'll go on to talk about all those steps and what you did, but thank you very much. Barb, I'm just interested there because you speak to a lot of our members. Obviously, that is the main part of your job.
Yeah.
Is that what do you think about this? Where are they on that journey? I know that's a very broad question, but
Yeah, I definitely relate to what you've just said there, Paul. I still visit a lot of manufacturers where the top leadership team really don't understand their accountability for health and safety, and they don't understand the intangible benefits you get from having a good health and safety culture. Okay. So it is about leadership, and you said the new top team were very, very influential in changing that. You do need that right at the top, somebody with a vision, and the interpersonal skills to bring the entire workforce along with you on that journey. Now, it's not just about the vision. You've got to be able to care. You've got to show that you care about people. And somewhere down the line, we've lost it. With our drive for productivity and profitability, short-term gain, we've lost the focus on people. And it, just going back to ESG, the last session, where we're trying to bring people back into the equation again. Good health and safety culture is built on people talking to each other, the leaders talking to the workers, communicating and consulting. There's not enough communication or consultation around health and safety.
And I think on that as well, Barbara, KPIs, what we actually measure plays an important role. It may be that you've got a KPI that says we're going to have 20 first aid incidents this year. Is that really acceptable? Are we happy that we're going to harm 20 people? It's not. So we really need to think about the KPIs. The KPIs that we actually, or the things that we actually measure and what we publicise across the organisation has a massive impact on our behaviour. So we should think about that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just, I've got to say this because, we talked about KPIs a little bit there. There's a colleague of mine in the room that told me a story, true story, many, many years ago about, a zero accident KPI. That many people have that, but I'm talking about 30 years ago, something like that. It was a really serious KPI, and you got a bonus if there were no accidents in a year. Right? That's true. And what do you think happened? How many accidents do you think they had? Yeah. 0 was the answer. But not really. I mean, that's what was reported. They physically hid accidents, and it just drives a terrible culture. So that KPIs piece there, as well as everything else you said, is really important.
Yeah, and I think another issue that the businesses have is I've seen some businesses massively downsize. So that means there's more pressure on those people remaining to do more with less. And the first thing that gets squeezed is training, and also a focus on safety, and training is a big part of safety culture. And I've had engineers in front of me, I've asked them to do stuff in relation to health and safety, and one guy burst into tears because he had so much on his plate. So we've got to think about the consequences of how we do business today and the impacts on people as well.
Yeah. We can, and we sort of have talked about statistics, and you get fined a lot of money if you get it wrong. I mean, that's not a surprise to anyone. Yes, but the point you made there about you got to care. I'm not trying to oversimplify things, but it really is as simple as that. If the people at the very top care about their employees and care that they go home in the same condition or better at the end of the day, then that will drive the right culture.
Yeah. I think you were alluding to that, weren't you, Paul, about the caring?
Absolutely, yeah. And I've got some examples later, how our senior, we call them our senior leadership team, it's basically our exec, but our exec actually care about our workforce. They walk the walk, talk the talk, or talk the walk the talk, whichever way around it is. But they're there, they're out there. We've got a CEO who ends all his emails on, and remember, think safe, work safe, home safe. That's our mantra, shall we say, think safe, work safe, home safe. With our senior leadership team will go out and they would demonstrate their commitment to health and safety behaviour by what we call Stand Up for Safety Day. So they will go out and they will talk to people. So they're giving up, one of their days to go either onto the shop floor or into the field and say to the guys, so talk to me about health and safety. Are them boots any good? Are they the right boots? What about your gloves? Are they the right gloves? How do they work for you. You know, what are the biggest risks that you actually face today, and how are we actually managing that? So for me, that demonstrates that they actually care, and that's the message that it actually sends to the whole organisation.
Yeah, you're giving people time. They're giving their people time.
Absolutely.
They're talking to their people. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's like, you know, the slide previous to this one, I think the bottom point was, you know, demonstrate. Sorry, no, probably wasn't that one then. Probably, yeah. If your people think you don't care, they're likely to leave. You know, we're very fortunate. You know, we are actually growing. We're recruiting more and more people, but we're losing very few. And our safety record is actually, you know, being reflected in that as well.
Thank you for that. So, Paul, you talked about when you joined the company, you were reactive, and then in latter years you were independent, and then you went on to interdependent. Yeah, I'm just interested in that journey. You talked about some bits there, but what are the specific things? What are the actions? What are the tangible things that people can take away? How did you make that journey?
So I think the key thing for me really is if I look at the interaction between independent and interdependent. So 4 years ago, we had a new exec, new CEO. We brought in a new senior leadership team. And what I did in November, I went to them and I said, look, I want to run a behavioural safety course across the group, and I want the support of Make UK. Didn't want Make UK to come in and do anything different. You know, we've got a good health and safety culture, but there were certain things that we wanted to introduce and certain things that we wanted to reinforce. So CEO went, yeah, no problem. It's great. He said, the only proviso is I want the senior leadership team to sit down on that sit down on that workshop and sit through the pilot. Once we've sat through the pilot, we'll then sign it off. So straight away, that demonstrated the commitment to that behavioural safety and the buy-in. So we got it signed off in November 2023, and then the objective was we need to get all Brush Group employees through behavioural safety by the end of Q1 2024. So big ask, but not just that, a huge commitment, 700 employees that we needed to get through in the quarter. So obviously there's financial pressures and everything else that goes with that, but we managed to get 90% of employees through the behavioural safety. So you might say, okay, so what's been the tangible benefit? You know, have we seen any improvement? Well, yes, we have. Ironically enough, we see more first aid incidents being reported. You know, is that a bad thing? No, not really. If you think back to the KPI that Chris was just saying, you know, we always have accidents, you know, and people do cut themselves. But now people are reporting these first aid incidents, these minor incidents. It gives us an opportunity to put the correct measures in place to prevent the more serious accidents from occurring. And for me, that's absolutely key. You know, people will come up and talk to me. We've empowered the workplace. We now run something we call a safety improvement opportunity. So it's quite simple. It's a QR code. Our workforce can scan the QR code. Once they scan the QR code, they get an opportunity to raise a hazard. A hazard, as you're all aware, something which has got the potential to cause harm, might be an unsafe act or an unsafe condition. So we've empowered the workplace to come in and do something with us to help us and help them improve their health and safety. Make UK team, been very good, very supportive. You know, the behavioural safety course, I sat down with Lee Hamilton, and we sat down together to put the course together, to put the right course, the right workshop together, what was actually going to benefit our organisation. Because all our organisations are different and they've just got different starting places. Fortunate, I mean, Neil at the back of the room, Neil came and delivered many of the workshops for us, you know, and the feedback was great. And I say, and we've actually seen, you know, a huge improvement in the engagement from our workers across the whole group.
Yeah, and they've probably got more information about health and safety as well because they're more engaged, so they're asking more questions about, you know,
absolutely,
new processes and procedures as they're coming in. Yeah,
absolutely, Barbara. And it was actually interesting because during one of the workshops, we'd got a team there and they went, I've never seen the CEO. You know, who's your CEO? Who's the CEO? Never met him. So we was fortunate that our CEO was actually on site that day. So the message got fed back to the CEO. He went, well, I'll pop down and introduce myself then. So he took the time out to go down and spend 10 minutes, you know, with the team who was on there and said, I'm Nicholas Pitrat, I'm the CEO. And this is why it's really important, and this is why we're actually running this behavioural safety. So that message there was really important, and what I should say is that he actually endorsed the workshop as well by putting a few paragraphs right at the start to say, this is why I'm actually doing it. Also, this is why we're actually doing it as an organisation. But because obviously he couldn't attend every single workshop, but what we did do, we made sure that there was a senior leader from the organisation that actually opened the workshop. And same again, that's a very important message. It just sends that message that, we do actually care.
Mm.
Thank you very much. And just to add to that, it's important to talk about the other side. The more, Paul's given a very positive example of where, let's say you got it right. There are lots of other examples, companies that we come across where we'll start to talk about an initiative and it becomes clear that it's a box-ticking exercise. People will say, I want to improve the safety culture. We've got to do that. So in 45,001, come along and talk to us. And we say, we have that conversation that Paul and Barb are talking about. It's really important that the top leadership get involved and they care and all of those sort of things. And, it's, I haven't really got time for that. But if you can just run a training course and make sure everyone goes through it. And honestly, and you can choose to believe me or not, we won't do that. We refuse to do that because if you don't get that senior level buy-in, you are just ticking a box and it is just a waste of time. And, we didn't walk away, just to be clear. We explained and took the time to explain what you're talking about, why the commitment of senior leadership and their involvement is critical. And then it goes well most of the time. But, really, really important.
Yeah, often when I'm teaching, I say to people, safety is a team sport. So you need to get everybody involved in the equation there. And it's important that you communicate and consult with the workers so that everybody does their bit around hazard spotting, which you've demonstrated you've got at the Bush Group. Because, you need everybody out there looking after each other so that you don't have those accidents and incidents. So you want to be confident as a senior leader that everybody's doing their bit to improve safety.
I think the key thing there, Barbara, is hazard spotting's great, but it's then what you do about it. Mm. It's no good if somebody says, oh, there's a hazard there, if somebody's likely to trip up over that, I'll go and tell the health and safety manager. Okay, it's great in some respects, but in the time that you've actually gone to tell the health and safety manager, somebody's probably tripped up it. So it's about instilling those behaviours that there's a hazard there and I'm going to do something about it if it's safe for me to do so. That's the actual key thing. And then you've got to feed that, almost close that loop, because if there is a hazard identified that the worker can't do anything about, we need to demonstrate that we've taken that on board and we've done something about it, and this is what we've actually done.
So, Barbara, I'm just going to come to you now. I'm just interested what you think. We've been very positive here. Have you come across any organisations that maybe have tried to do this, or they're not even going anywhere near this? They're worried about what might happen. What are the sort of barriers that you see out there?
The barriers I see are a general lack of awareness of the senior leadership team about their obligations in terms of looking after people and health and safety. Sometimes I see that the infrastructure has been allowed to degrade on a site, so there would be, in terms of improving worker conditions on the shop floor, would need a massive capital investment. So that's a barrier as well. Rundown sites are a barrier to safety culture. So I often go and have a look in the restrooms or the canteen or places like this, saying, well, are we really looking after the people when they're not on the shop floor? And just a lack of realisation that you need to be looking after people and you need to be improving their environment in the workplace, and you will get those intangible benefits of improved productivity and improved morale, basically. And I always say to people that it's QEII, quality, safety, health, environment. They're all interlinked. If I go into a workplace, within 5 minutes I can tell what the safety culture is like, because I can you just go and see what people are doing, how they're working, and if they've got a poor safety culture, that will impact on your quality, impact on your product and what's going out the door. Yeah. So it really will benefit the bottom line if you get that safety culture right.
Yeah. And I think that last, I mean, it's all important, but, you know, just to pick up on that last point there, I made a joke at the beginning about putting the word safety in the title, and, you know, I talked about why that's not a good idea. I mean, you know, safety culture, call it what you like, organisational culture, quality culture, it's culture, it's the way the organisation is. And if there's not this sort of feeling that we're all in it together and people do care about each other and so on, it's not just health and safety that will suffer. You know, as you said, it's everything. You know, we should all be going to work for a couple of key reasons. You know, there are sort of business-related reasons, and the other reasons are, you know, there's a certain amount of responsibility and care for the workforce that are there. So I think that's important. So thank you. Paul, coming back to your specific examples here, is there anything where, and again, you know, we've been very positive, but I'm sure there were some stumbling blocks along the way. I mean, any particularly difficult things that you dealt with that people here might benefit from?
We've actually been very lucky, you know, and we've not actually faced the challenges that many organisations will actually face. And I think that's because we had a very good starting point, you know, 4 or 5 years ago. You know, do we always get it right? No. You know, do we have challenges? Yes, we do. But I think for me, it's how you actually tackle those, how you actually deal with those, and how you actually communicate to the workforce. You know, for me, that's absolutely key. The other thing is you know, it's important that we do what we say we're going to do. You know, there's no point saying, yeah, we're going to invest in health and safety, we're going to get you some new tooling, we're going to review our PPE, etc., and then do nothing. You know, because same again, that sends the wrong message. So, like I say, I'm not saying we always get it right, but we've actually had a very good journey. But we're also fortunate the business is growing, so we've been in a position where we've been able to invest. Our health and safety department has actually doubled in size, and we've been able to invest in lots of infrastructure and consumables as well that are suitable and sufficient for the guys and for the workers.
So, last question, $1 million question here, Barb, to you, no pressure. We understand, we've talked about lots of reasons why safety culture is a good idea. Does the regulator, do the HSE actually care? You know, I'm sure they care, but is it something they actually look at? Are they interested in culture?
Yeah, they absolutely are. And when I look at the remarks that the HSE inspectors make when they've had a successful prosecution, it is all about the cultural failures in the business that led to systemic failures. And they've said openly that poor safety culture leads to accidents and incidents. And you could have a safety management system, but if you've got a poor safety culture, stuff is going to happen, basically. And they're very keen to prosecute, especially management teams that are not proactive in health and safety management. And you've talked about that all afternoon, Paul. Proactivity, getting out there on the shop floor,
absolutely,
walking the talk, absolutely crucial. And showing that leadership is the most important thing.
Okay, thank you. I asked that question because I think sometimes there's a view that safety culture is fluffy and, yeah, it's a nice to have, but it's not as important as abiding by the law. Well, you know, 45,001, which is the international standard, you might think it's more important than the law, does talk about culture directly, and as Barb's just illustrated, the HSE are definitely interested in it. You can see it in any investigation summary that they read. So, I've just been shown the 5 minutes to go. I think that's what it said. I couldn't really see. But we have got 5 minutes to go. So, thank you both so far. We're going to now open the floor to questions. So, if anyone has any questions, please put your hand up and we'll come round with the microphone.
Hi, it's Lee from BE Systems. I'm just interested in where well-being sits, because we've just been in the ESG group before this, and then the safety culture piece, and you talk about caring about employees. How is well-being coming along the tracks in the whole safety culture?
So I'm quite happy to take that, Lee. Thank you. So for us, what we've really been focusing on is getting our safety in place first. So let's get our health and safety in place, and then we're going to focus on our well-being. It's a journey that, I'll be honest, we are struggling with a little bit. And one reason behind that is that we've actually struggled to find a provider that's actually going to give us everything that we need across the whole country. So, but what I do recognise is that well-being is really important. and there are lots of proactive measures from our occupational health providers that we should be dealing with and we should be looking at. It may be that we're providing hearing protection for all our workers, yet when they go for their wellbeing assessment, they've all got bad ears. So what does that say about what we think we're doing and what we're actually doing? So, cards on the table, for us, we're probably not where we should be, but we certainly do recognise that it's an important aspect of health and safety.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I see that's overlooked is just the physical environment that people are walking into. Is it pleasant? Is it a pleasant environment? Is it unpleasant? Is it lack of lighting? Is it dusty? Is it hot? Is it cold? I think some of these issues about the workplace have traditionally been seen as something that's not important, but is getting higher up the agenda.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. And just to add, I think if you can find, a good I would imagine you've got one, but if you can find a good specialist partner that looks at these sort of benefits, additional staff benefits that lead to well-being, whether it's gym membership or whatever, we know the list of things. I mean, that is the next step in this point we're making about showing people you care, because we know there is probably, but people don't perceive that as a, you're not doing it because it's the law, because it's not the law, etc. So I think it's a really good way, it's the right thing to do, clearly, but it's a really good way to lead safety culture. I think the two things go together. So thank you for the question.
Just to give you a little bit of context to the question, so I've been running a mechanical engineering business for aerospace and automotive for 3 years, and just recently got ISO 45001. So I'm about to leave the business, and employees are worried about the culture changing as a result of me leaving. What one piece of advice would you give that I should pass on to my successor?
Well, I will say I have seen the safety culture drop off the face of the planet within weeks. So it would be a big concern for me if you were the main driver and the workers were looking to you as the key player. If you didn't have a natural successor, that would be my point.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I think you've then got a question about how the culture is actually embedded within the organisation. Yeah. If I flip that the other way around, we had a poor safety culture. Where I'd have senior leaders come up to me and say, "I've just seen somebody working unsafe." Okay, well, what have you done about it?
Yeah.
Well, I told you.
Yeah.
So that says to me that it's not embedded. So it's about how you actually embed that culture into your senior leadership team as well. I think that's absolutely key. And then it might be, looking at this scale here and thinking, so where are we actually? Where do you think you are, and where does your senior leadership team think you are?
Yeah, and I'd just add, I mean, some of the stuff we talked about at the beginning of, is there a normal safety culture journey? I don't know. But on this perfect world that we're talking about here, step one is getting leadership commitment, leadership involvement. And as the panel have said, it sounds like maybe, if you're leaving and someone's not going to pick it up, the question is that there, I suppose. So I think my one piece of advice, and maybe you've said it, is to get that commitment from the people that remain somehow, and explaining to them, the moral, legal or financial reasons why that's important. And sorry, I don't want to go on, but 45,001 clause 5, I mean, it, as you know, I'm sure, talks about having a good safety culture, more or less. So risk is they'll lose the standard. Okay, any other questions? Thank you for that, by the way. Yes, we've got a question here. Okay, I can hear you, it's good.
How do you overcome complacency?
Well, I think you have to keep coming at this safety piece from multiple angles. So I used to be a research scientist, so I often talk about entropy, the natural law of decay. So if you have to keep reinvigorating the same message, and constantly, that would be my advice. And don't do just one thing once a year.
Yeah, and I think for me, just to follow up on that, we don't use the same media of communication. So I will write a Safety Matters bulletin each month. Our CEO will put a safety communication out. We will do safety videos. We will do toolbox talks. So we use lots of different medium to reaffirm the same message. But the same message is there. Think safe, work safe, home safe.
Yeah. I call it cheeky safety. You're just hitting them with multiple communication channels, and it just gets under the skin of the workers eventually.
Yeah. And then it becomes a way of life.
Yeah.
So they expect it.
I think you should trademark that, Barb.
Cheeky safety.
Yeah, very
Excellent.
good. Yeah. Let's get that on a logo. Okay. Thank you for the question there. And again, just to add, the question I asked at the beginning about where do you think you are in which of the 4 categories, when we do that properly and we got a lot more time, the key thing is there that it has to be all the time. You know, if you're not answering yes all the time to the questions that we ask, you can't put yourself in that category, if you see what I mean. So it's not like, yeah, we do that, we're interdependent sometimes. Well, you're not in there then, you're the one back. It needs to be 100% of the time. So it's hard, but it's so important, the consistency.
I think one of the hardest things is once you can have the most brilliant safety training on the planet, but if management are not following it up to make sure that everything's embedded and people are working the way they've been trained, then it will fall by the wayside.
Yeah, yeah, and you're also wasting your money doing safety training if you're not going to follow it up, but it's common. Right. Thank you. Okay, any more questions? I'm guessing no, because we haven't got any time left. Anyone? Okay. If anyone does think of any questions later on, you know, we're around all day, and you know, clearly you can just contact us and ask us. Let's see what we've got next. So just so you know, these are the next things that are happening. So we've got lunch, which is now, and then we've got Rachel Reeves. You might be interested in listening to that. That's at 2:25 past. All that remains for me to do is to first of all thank our panel for giving up their time. So a round of applause for them. Thank you very much. Brilliant. And thank you for coming. Hope you found it useful. This is the part of the show where we talk to one of our consultants who's going through the IPD process to become a chartered member of CMIOSH. Hopefully it will help to demystify that process for you. Hi Leila, how are you doing?
Hi Chris, I am good. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Yes, not as good as you probably. You've had quite an eventful week, haven't you?
Very exciting week. Very exciting week indeed.
Awesome.
So I may have had my CMIOSH chartership peer review interview yesterday afternoon.
Wow.
Hot off the press.
Okay, excellent. So we're recording this on Friday,
yes.
And you had your interview Thursday yesterday.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, brilliant. So it really is, as you say, hot off the press. Okay, well, you know, as long as it went well, that's the you know, be an awkward conversation if it didn't.
Well, exactly. Can you imagine it? But yes,
yeah.
Am I allowed to say I actually might have enjoyed it a little bit?
Absolutely, yes.
Once I actually got into it, obviously the build-up yesterday morning, I couldn't sit still. I had to walk everywhere and just take time and just walk about because I was incredibly nervous. But honestly, I actually didn't need to be, which was very, very nice of CMIOSH to. From the moment they came onto the call, I was made to feel, or hopefully, you know, put at ease as much as I could be.
Okay, so tell us a bit about the. I mean that sounds really good because it's important, isn't it? This, you know, chartered membership thing that we're trying to achieve here, and so people can get very nervous about it. It's just human nature because it's important. And I know from experience, CMIOSH do quite a lot of work in trying to put people at ease.
Yes.
So just give us an insight into what happened then. So it's a virtual call. It's on Zoom.
Yes.
What happens at the beginning? How do they put you at ease, as you say?
So actually, if I could go back 2 weeks prior, because this might help our listeners, I had an email from the team basically giving me so much information around the sort of the things of your presentation. What sort of format should it look like? What structure should you put in there? And then how long it needs to go on for. 10 minutes of talking about you. Sounds wonderful, I said. But also other information, general support, but also click here to have a look at what a previous interview looks like so that you can kind of gear yourself up to sort of go, oh, okay, well, that, you know, I know the sort of structure of questions they're going to ask me.
Interesting, yeah.
But also for any technophobes out there, try this link beforehand to make sure everything's working. And thankfully everything was working. So that's kind of the build up to CMIOSH trying to make you feel just a little bit better about it all, I would suggest.
Yeah. Okay. From experience, we all know, don't we? If you're joining, I mean, you know, at Make UK we use Teams all the time, but if you're using a new platform like Zoom, for example, all the buttons aren't quite in the same place. It's the last thing you need is the technical problem.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah.
But then sticking on the technical theme for a moment, bringing that into the interview, when I joined, or rather when I was let into the Zoom room, if you like, there was the lady from CMIOSH herself, who was kind of like the mediator, go between, controller of things and timings, which was awesome. And the two interviewers as well were on the call, so I could see them. And the CMIOSH lady said to me that did I want her to run my presentation or did I want to do it? So again, please, can you do it so that I know it's not another thing that I have to worry about? Brilliant.
Yeah.
So
nice.
and she said to me, absolutely, of course, I can get all that set up, no problem. But then she went through and sort of said, this is the format that it's going to be. This is what the timings are going to look like. This is what you should expect. Do you have any questions? Please don't worry. It's going to be conversational, but where possible, can you try and be quite concise with your answers? So immediately I started to panic because you know what I'm like. So I said,
how did that go? Yeah.
Brilliantly.
Anyway, we'll get to that. Yeah.
So yeah, very conversational, very relaxed atmosphere, and thankfully I could feel myself starting to go, okay, this is fine. I think I'm we're going to get through this. And then introduced me to the two interviewers. Both lovely people, introduced themselves, explained the format, what it was going to look like, and exactly what we were expecting. You're going to have an initial question and then some technical questions in the middle and then a closing question. And it's going to be within this hour time frame. But actually, the first 10 minutes of it are going to be your presentation that's all about you. And at that point, the CMIOSH mediator said, right, are you ready for me to put the presentation up on the screen? Are you ready to go, basically? And the answer was yes, please. And off we went. And literally my presentation about me was 9 minutes. So I just scuppered a minute in there. Can you believe it? And that was no real questions on that, because what we're doing is giving the interviewers just a general understanding of how you've got to where you are. What does that look like? And the structure was things like, your career progression over the last sort of 5 years. What's been where are you now? What was your biggest challenge so far? What's your top 3 successes? And then where do you see yourself in the future? What does that look like? So you can see, you can kind of make a big something about that, or a little sort of 10 minutes about that. And it's quite easy to stick to the time purposes on that, if you like.
I'm with you. Can I ask you a couple of questions on the presentation?
Of course.
Because I've done it, but it was a while ago, and I know it changes subtly and sometimes not subtly all the time. So it's good to get a current view on things. Do they tell you? Do CMIOSH give you some guidance about what should be in the presentation?
Yes.
Do they give you a pro forma? How does that work?
So again, the 2 weeks beforehand, they when they send you all this good information about what, click the link here, do that. In there is an example presentation. Now, I would highly recommend it's not the one that you use, and perhaps put your own template together, but it literally structures in those sort of 5 sections of your career for 5 years, the this, the that. And honestly, once the hardest part for me was getting started. What template do I use?
Right.
But once I'd decided on that, the rest of it came quite easily. So I would suggest probably maximum of half an hour on it once I'd actually settled down and got the format in place. Because
what to actually create it, half an hour?
Yes. Yeah. I would suggest so.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. And my other question was, in terms of that time limit of 10 minutes, I know they say 10 minutes and so on. How hard are they on that? Is it
hard
just guidance?
Definitely.
Okay. Right.
Yes. Right. And you can absolutely see why, because they have a requirement of questions to get through. And if you allow
Right.
more on one, you're going to reduce less on the other. So I can see why they have to be quite hard on it. And actually, they say to you at the beginning, we are strict on timings. So please, it's not that we don't want to listen to you. It's just that we've got what we need to get through. So if at any point we say, right, let's move along, it's absolutely not a problem. It's just that we know we have to stick to timings. So
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. And from a logistics point of view, I don't know how many people they see in the day these days, but they could have 3 or 4 people to see in a day, and so
exactly, yeah,
they've got to keep, and also it's got to be fair, hasn't it? You can't have 2 hours and then the next person has 30 minutes and so on. Yeah,
yes,
so it makes sense. Okay, so you did the presentation,
yep.
And then we're on to the questions.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about that.
Sure. So the first question was, and I understand from the interviewers that this is pretty much a standard question that's always asked, is around the route that basically got you to the interview. So they confirmed with me, did you do the open exam, the open assessment? And I said, yes, I did. So then they said, okay, and then asked me a question on how the question was sort of based around how did you go about approaching it? How did you complete it? What did it look like for you? How did you go about your research? They were far more succinct than I was on that question, but it kind of included all of that in there. So I literally talked them through the part A, which was all about the multiple choice questions, which we've done on previous podcasts, and how I approached that. Again, referring back to our previous podcast of where going through the syllabus was realistically the only way you can sort of prepare yourself for what could potentially come up in part A. And then how I went about part B, which was the 2 sort of essay type questions, if you like, and how I sort of approached the research for that. What did that look like? So I talked them through, I think mine was on musculoskeletal disorders and coma sites or coma emergency plans. So thinking about those 2, how did I go about researching those and what did it look like? Follow-up question at the end of that was, what did I find the most difficult about the whole process or the parts of the question? And I will repeat exactly what I said to you on our last call. It's getting it down to 750 words per question. That's the hardest. Okay.
Yeah. And that must be what everyone struggles with, aren't they? You can't be in a situation where you're saying, I don't know how I'm going to get to 750. Not that that's a problem if you don't, but yeah. Okay. So on that first question, to me, it sounds like it's very much like, it's not a technical based question. It's nothing you can prepare for in terms of, I've got to know this or that or the other. It's an opinion. How did you find it? Which is, it's just a nice question, isn't it? You're just talking about how you got on. There's
exactly.
I'm sure I'm going to say there's probably not a wrong answer to that. I'm sure there is a wrong answer. They're looking for certain things, obviously, but yeah, it's nice. It gets you started. Okay.
Yes.
So we started off with a nice question.
Exactly.
Where do we go from there?
A nice, easy question. And then there were 6 technical questions to get through. And actually, again, the interviewers were so good. They said the question and then they kind of elaborated. If I maybe had a puzzled look on my face, I'm not too sure. I'm hoping I didn't. So just give me a bit more information and then allowed me to talk. And there were the question subjects were things like forming an HSE committee, and sort of details around that, methodology of risk assessment, details around that. What other categories were there? DSC, sort of information on that. And I think where perhaps they needed more information, there'd be the occasional follow-up question, okay, you said this, so then when would you look to review that, or what would that look like, to kind of maybe keep me on track, but also keep me to the point of what they're looking for in the answer. So I felt like they were helping me throughout the whole process as well. Okay,
so sounds good. So you mentioned a couple of things in there. So you talked about DSE. So I just think we're not going to go for every question, but I just think it'd be useful to our listeners. I mean, when we talk about the questions about DSE, how do they put it? What sort of things do they ask you about DSE?
Okay, so obviously I can't remember it verbatim,
Yeah.
but it was along the lines of, can you talk to us about the main points or the main focus areas of DSE? So then my brain, the way my brain works, sorry listeners, is that I'll go into well, what's the point of it all? What's actually the need for it? So I went in with injury and illness part 1 and the setup is part 2. So in my brain, I'm going, right, I'm going to talk about those 2 parts of it. So started with the setup, so going through, I mean obviously people know DSE, but you know your screens, your keyboards, your mouse, your laptops, your desk, your chair, my goodness, your environment, your lighting, all that sort of good stuff, because it leads to, and then went through the injuries and the illness, musculoskeletal disorders, carpal tunnels, all that sort of good stuff that goes with it. So at the end of that, there was the follow-up question of, okay, so now talk me through perhaps how you would, or when you would need to review the DSE assessment or something like that. I think those were the words. So then obviously if anything's changed, if you've changed, if you've got anything, and you know, just general period of time, all that sort of stuff that I'm really hoping was the right answer, came out to them.
Well, you know, sounds good to me. So not that means anything, but you know, I'm sure it was. Now that sort of leads me on to another question here, and I'm just interested what you think. So you were asked a question. If we talk about technical areas, you were asked a question about DSE.
Yep.
I guess things like standard stuff like risk assessments in there, maybe accident investigation. But people might be listening to this and thinking, well, yeah, DSE is quite a specialist area. You know, and I'm just making up an example here. I work on a construction site. I don't really have a lot to do with DSE. How am I meant to know that, etc. I mean, do you have a view on that? What do you think? I mean, is DSE a fair area to tackle? How deep do they go into it, I suppose?
Well, that's a bit of a tough one, because I think with having done the multiple choice format questions, it covers all areas. So I would have hoped that when you go in for your peer review, you're going to understand that there's literally all areas that could be covered.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
But thinking about that, then perhaps a piece of advice for people would be, if you do have areas that perhaps you are not familiar with or too familiar with, it could be worth saying at the start, actually guys, I'm not too familiar with DSE. There's no, there's no harm in being open with them, because I believe that they're not there to trip you up. And I also believe that if you're not too familiar, they may have supporting questions that kind of go, well, okay, so what would your thoughts be around then, I don't know, injuries that you could get from awkward postures? So to maybe link it back, so that you're able to then hopefully feel more comfortable with the question.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that sounds good. And to that point, I mean, at no point they're saying, right, DSE regulations 1992 or whatever it might be, what's regulation 3 say, what's regulation 4 say, it's not that technical detailed, if my understanding is correct. Yeah.
No, it's really not. Or certainly it wasn't for the questions that I had come through to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And as you've put it, the questions are, what are the factors I'm going to consider, and what are the sorts of injuries that I could sustain, sort of thing. So
yes.
Okay. All right. So that's DSE. Risk assessment's a pretty standard area of question, I would guess. And how do they? And as I said a couple of minutes ago, we're not going to go for every question, and we won't. But risk assessment's a different type of question, perhaps. So what do they say there, roughly?
Yeah. So that was, and I remember the question for that. It was, what's the methodology of performing a risk assessment? And so in my mind, I'm going, it's the 5 steps to risk assessment that hopefully we're all extremely familiar with. And although, maybe I had more to say on the detail, but in my mind, it's like, well, step 1, identify the hazard. Step 2, who can be harmed and how. Step 3, evaluate the risk. Step 4, write it down. Step 5, review it, that sort of thing. So going through that helped me structure my response to them. And really, I think that was as difficult as that one got, because the methodology for risk assessment is the 5 steps to risk assessment, isn't it?
Okay.
So we're all quite happy with that one.
And do they? And so there's a let's call it a technical element to that. What are the steps of a risk assessment? We've covered that. And then what do they say? Do they ask you about your experience around risk assessment?
Actually, yes. The follow-up question to that was, can you give me a latest example of when you've performed a risk assessment? What were the steps that you found? What was your sort of risk analysis profile of it? What do your risk matrix scoring and that sort of thing look like? And I'd talked through, basically the one that I talked through was a recent one with forklifts in a yard, basically, and looking at the risk assessment for that and all that sort of good stuff. Yeah, I think I hope they were happy with that.
Yeah. Were they smiling? I mean,
yes, they were always smiling, which was fantastic. It's nice to see people smile.
Indeed, there's a good indication, perhaps. Yeah. Okay. So I just think, the reason I asked that, I think it's just important to touch on. You and I and most other people that are listening to this probably realise there's 5 steps to risk assessments from the HSE guidance, etc. And like you said already, you've been through an open assessment. You've been through whatever route you take. You've been through a route that sort of checks that you do know things like 5 steps, right? So you shouldn't really get to that point and go, I don't know what you're talking about. What's a risk assessment? That something's gone wrong if that's the case. But equally, if in your case, you've done the CMIOSH diploma, so that when that talks about risk assessment, it centres around the 5 steps. But I suppose not you, but another person could get to that position and arguably not know all about the HSE's 5 steps to risk assessment, maybe. If they were just describing their own company procedure around risk assessment that they've maybe put in place or changed or helped with, do you feel like that would answer the question? I mean, it's difficult for you to say, you're not on the other side of the table, but they weren't saying to you, what are the HSE's 5 steps of risk assessment?
It was, what's the methodology for performing a risk assessment itself. And actually, I would suggest that companies that have a risk assessment process are going to be covering the fundamentals, regardless if it's in the 5 steps format. But again, I also think that if anyone was struggling a little to perhaps get all the information across, I have no doubt that they had prompts, guides, support, maybe to sort of say, okay, well, you've said that, what does that look like, or can you give me an example of that, to perhaps try and bring the person along, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to just ask a bit more about that. But, I'm sure we know each other quite well. I'm sure you probably didn't need a lot of pulling along or whatever the phrase might be. But if they want to know more, do they ask sort of follow-up questions? Do they say, tell us a bit more about this, the other, whatever it might be?
Yeah, exactly that. In fact, one of the things I didn't mention, one of the questions was around how would you set up an audit, and so on. So I had actually put in my presentation about one of my top achievements was being lead auditor for a site over in Norway, which was honestly one of the best times of my life. But so I was talking through that, but I hadn't specifically linked that the audit process was what I'd been doing in Norway. So at the end of it, the interviewer sort of said to me, okay, so you've talked through the process. Can you give me an example of that when you've actually done this process, and what did it look like? And then I said, oh, well, so remember back in the beginning where I said about going over to Norway, one of my top 3 achievements, lead auditor. So I'm going to give you that as the example and talk you through how I set up, even down to the points of, the travel ready for Monday morning, what timings we'd put in place and all that sort of stuff. So you can back it up with your experience if they want to know more, which they did on this occasion.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, no, that's to me, and hopefully the listeners agree, that gives a lot of reassurance, because, basically they ask a question, you answer it, just, honestly, to the best of your ability, probably not that technical.
Yeah.
And then if they need to know more, they ask you more about
Yeah.
the particular area they need to know about. Yeah.
Exactly.
Because I know from my own experience, they have to, try to a reasonable level to draw the answers out. It's not like, let's say, the old days where here's the question, that's your answer, you missed X, Y, and Z, sorry, whatever. But it's different to that. I guess there is a limit to, and again, I'm really sure you didn't experience this, but I guess there's a limit to how many times they would ask you the same question a different way, how long they would spend on it. There must be a limit to that, I guess.
Yeah, I would have thought so. But unfortunately, you're right. I think I got maybe a couple of questions at the end, and we were good. But I do think that they really, or certainly I felt it was clear to me from the word go, they were not there to trip me up. They were not there to for me to fail. They wanted me to succeed, and they were only there to be supportive. If that makes sense. So it really 100%. Helped.
And I tell you what, I mean, this is all useful to our listeners. That's the reason we're doing it. But I mean, to me, that's the most important, the most useful piece of information there. It's all fantastic, but that really puts, I would imagine, people's minds at ease.
Yeah.
That they're not there to trip you up, as you've said. They want to draw the information out. They want you to succeed. They must check that you're at the right level, but ultimately they want you to succeed. So that's important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And perhaps one thing for our listeners, I would say, is that I am the world's worst for stage fright. I get so incredibly nervous. I know you, and the amount of stuff I do, you'd think, but I do have the most horrendous stage fright, and I was terrified. But within minutes, I had relaxed, because they were there to support me, not trip me up. So it really is. I really hope that helps people. That you can tell anyone to you blue in the face, don't be nervous, but you're going to be. But honestly, I couldn't believe how quickly I just relaxed into it.
Yeah, but that is, as you say, amazing. Yeah. Now, Leila, I've really got to ask you this question. You and I talk on the podcast. We have lots of conversations. They usually last quite a long time. You like to talk, I like to talk, I like to, etc.
Maybe.
So do they? Did you feel like, did they ever cut you off and say, right, that's it, we've got enough, we've had enough now, we're at time limit, etc.? I mean, how does that work?
So about halfway through, which was 30 minutes in, because it's an hour, we were bang on target, because they what the two interviewers did that I had, the first interviewer did the first half an hour, the second interviewer did the second half an hour, so fine. At one point in the second half, there was we're just mindful of time. That kind of snapped me back into, right, got you, so let me just bullet point this, it's and we literally finished bang on the hour mark. We were saying, oh, thank you very much, really appreciate that, and off we go. And that was done.
So it's very much, and I know this is the case, but it's good to hear it's still what's happening. It's very much they're in control. They know the questions they've got to ask you and the answers they've got to get in that time. And I would imagine there must be the circumstance where we've heard enough, we need to move on. They've got the answer they want, because they've got to give the same time to everyone, of course.
Exactly.
But it sounds like the whole thing was in quite a nice, friendly, atmosphere, if you like. Yeah. Awesome.
There was one thing at the end that I think our listeners will appreciate. We had this first question about how you got here, your open assessment, or whichever route you took. These, I think it was 6 technical questions in between, and then there was the closing question about basically the CMIOSH code of conduct and the 4 pillars.
I've heard of it.
I also, I would hope so, yes. But as I also understand it, apparently that's a standard question to ask. What are the pillars, and sort of what sort of information you know, can you do a bit of a description about it? And then I was then asked, can you give me an example of when perhaps you've used this? So just in case for the people that don't know, Chris, I took your risk acronym for that so that
Excellent.
I could remember them.
Yeah. Tell us a bit more about that, Leila, because it's brilliant. Yeah.
Okay. So
even if I do say so myself.
It's absolutely perfect, but it's, you know, it's the right way of remembering it. Absolutely. So IOSH code of conduct, we've got risk. So R is respect, I is for integrity, S is for service, and C is for competence. And then, so talking a little bit about that, what I said, but I highly recommend, obviously, if you're not already, go and read the code of conduct and make sure that you are actually adhering to that. But respect is all about the respect for IOSH, their code of conduct, their charter, and basically, you know, when you become chartered, it's their reputation as well. So having that respect, but also respect for your members, your clients, the people that you're advising, be that, you know, your leaders on site, anything like that. Respect their privacy, respect what they need from you. Integrity, all about abiding by the law, being honest, but also recognizing any conflicts of interest and what you then do about that. So that's quite straightforward. Service, the service you provide. Are you giving the right service? Is it appropriate? Is it accurate? Is it timely? Is it professional? And then obviously competence. Are you competent? How do you keep your competence up? But also no advising beyond your competence. Yeah. And unfortunately, that was the example that I gave because I think it fits in nicely with a few others. So I got a double whammy in where I basically said I was asked to help with Desir. And I'm not a Desir person. We have an expert in there, one of our consultants. But basically saying to my member, I can't provide you that information because it's beyond my competence, but I've got someone who can. But to save you going through all of this again, let me do this timely for you. So bringing in service, let me take photos with your permission and videos, and then I can send that to our expert and they can get in touch with you. And then there we go. So that was just my example, and they seemed quite happy, I hope, with that.
And yeah, I mean, perfect. Yeah. And so we've talked about there a few things. It's a standard question.
Yes.
You know, everyone gets asked that at the end. That you've given us a nice, I mean, people should know the code, right? You know, you live by the code, etc.
You should,
right?
yes.
But anyway, you know, you've given us a good way to remember it there, the sort of risk, whatever, acronym, mnemonic, if that's the right word, acronym, yeah. So that's all good. And then I think the important point that it's all important. The really good point I took from that is, in terms of, yes, explain the 4 pillars, but in terms of an example, it's up to you to choose an example. You know, they're not going to say, give us an example to do with respect or integrity or whatever. You know, so if you have in your mind, you're thinking about preparing for the interview, you have an example in your mind, you're all good. So, you know, fine. And I think personally, it's a personal opinion, I think that competency example, most, you know, health and safety practitioners have been asked to do something, fire, Desir, pure, whatever it might be. That, you know, it's just they've not had that level of training, you know. So
exactly,
or competency, or however you want to put it. So it's good. Yeah.
Okay. The last thing to link that back to, again, a couple of weeks beforehand, the helping email that I had, it tells you there will be a question on the code of conduct, and they give you the link to the code of conduct in case you haven't seen it before, and they remind you of what the 4 pillars are. So every step of the way, they are supporting you so that hopefully you feel comfortable and confident in your answers.
Yeah. So if someone gets to that interview and the question is, you know, tell us about the 4 pillars, and they say, I don't know what you're talking about. Something's gone majorly wrong there, hasn't it? You know, they haven't read anything they've got from IOSH. Yeah. Apart from everything we said about you should know it anyway. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. So Leila, just to finish off, what's the process now? So your interview was literally yesterday.
Yes.
You know, what have they told you the process is from now on?
The closing information was that it takes up to 21 days because now it needs to be scored, and the video, because they record you as you go along. I think if there's anything that they need to review or anything like that, maybe, but that's why it can take up to 21 days. But apparently at the moment it's happening a little quicker, so I may hear beforehand. good because I can't wait 3 weeks. It will be through email, either a congratulations or no, and these are the reasons why. But then, as I also understand it, if it's a no and these are the reasons why, there's also going to be information and support on how you can resit or how you can review or that sort of good stuff. So
I know from my experience that if someone doesn't pass, the chairman has to write a specific report that exactly like you said, talks about the information, why you didn't pass, etc., and what to do next. That's just useful. Well, it's just information for our listeners, not something that you've got to worry about, I'm sure, by the sound of it all.
Honestly, anyway. if it doesn't, heaven forbid, it's not my time, I'm not too sure what else I could do. Because
that's a good place to be in, isn't it? A good. The worst thing would be you come out and you think, oh, I got this wrong, that wrong, what a disaster, etc. And I think you're quite the other way.
I hope
by the sound of it.
Fingers crossed, yes. Fingers crossed.
All right. Well, Leila, thanks very much for sharing that experience with us and for talking about the whole journey over the different episodes of the podcast that we've had. I think what we'll do when we hear the final result, etc., we might just do we'll have another conversation anyway, obviously, but we'll have another conversation maybe for the podcast and talk about some summary of the whole journey, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely, yes. Anything I can do to help our listeners.
Awesome, perfect, brilliant. All right, well, thank you very much again. As you said there, I think really useful for our listeners, so really appreciate it.
Cheers, thank you very much.
All right, speak to you soon.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, bye. Thanks for joining us. Hope you've enjoyed today's show. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss out on future episodes, and I'll see you on the next one.